Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking financial accounting, and we are working on the Chapter 1 problems, the Group B. And in the last 3 videos, we were working on the problem 1-39B. And all we have left to do here with this problem was to create the balance sheet and then figure out what our economic resources are and the amount that is owed. So let's just jump right to it. Okay, so again, there's a process to creating the financial statement that I like to go through. Keeps me on track. And if you watch the previous videos, I'm going to skip the idea about abbreviating and all the warnings about creating the financial statements. All right. So I'm just going to get right into it. So here is Alpha Inc. And the title of this financial statement is the balance sheet. Now for the heading date, we can put the date one of two ways. We can write it as of October 31, 2014, or we can also write it just the date itself. Okay. Personally, I like writing as of, right? Because that connotates that, it's as of that particular date. But either way is fine. Okay. If you look at the solution, they just write in the date. Now the heading is obviously center aligned. Okay. And the next thing I like to do is I like to write my categories. So I'm going to write, I'm going to write assets on the left. Okay. And notice I'm indenting it, or if it was in a column, that would be center aligned. I don't want it flush against the left, right? I'm going to do the same thing with liabilities, and I'm abbreviating there. And I'm going to write stockholders' equity, abbreviating there. Okay, so now I write in the categories. Then I list the accounts underneath those categories. So for assets, I have cash, accounts receivable, supplies, land, equipment, and building. And again, I'm just abbreviating, but you need to write them out if you're going to give this to anybody other than, yourself, meaning if you're going to turn it in for a test. I see people write accounts receivable like this, A/R, and they're abbreviating. You're going to lose points because you do that. Okay. The words accounts receivable should be written out, and they should be capitalized and so on and so forth. Okay. Under liabilities, we have accounts payable, and we have salaries payable. We have a note payable. All right. So let me just back up 1 second. Since I have all of my assets listed, I know that I'm going to do, I'm going to add those all up so I could write in total assets here. And the same thing here with the liabilities. I have more than one liability, so I know that I'm going to have a total liability here. Under equity, I have common stock, and I have retained earnings. Okay. And that's going to give me a total stockholders' equity. And of course, since my accounting equation is assets is equal to liabilities plus equity, okay, I'm going to want to know what my total liability and equity is. So underneath that, I'm going to have my total liability and stockholders' equity. Okay, so now that I have all of my accounts listed and the different calculations, it's time for me to put in the numbers. Since I only have one calculation here to get the total assets, all right, all I'm going to do is just list the numbers in one column, all right? So the first number in the column begins with the $, and that's 24,800 for the cash, 15,100 For receivables, 2,250. For supplies, 40,000. For land, 51,000. For equipment, and 142,000 for the building. And since we're adding those all up, I'm going to draw my underline, and my total assets are going to be 275,150. Of course, I double underline because that's the end of a calculation, and I denote it with a dollar sign because we're working with dollars. Okay, so that's my total assets, 275,150, which answers the question here, letter C, of what my economic resources are. So that's 275,150. D is asking me for what's the amount owed, which is what we're going to do next. Okay, so for my liabilities, now I can do this one of two ways, and the way I'm going to do it is the way I feel is preferable, okay, as compared to what you see for the answer. You know, in the answer, it only has one column. But remember, I'm doing two mathematical calculations here, right? I want a mathematical calculation to get my total liabilities, actually three calculations, total liabilities and my total stockholders' equity. But then I'm going to add those two together in order to get my total liability and stockholders' equity. So just watch me as I do this and you'll understand why. Okay, so since I have a mathematical calculation and I want that total liability to be in the rightmost column, I'm going to work one column to the left. Put my dollar sign because it's the first number, and my total liabilities is 13,000. My accounts payable is 13,700. My salaries are 4,750, and notes payable is 75,000. And since that's a mathematical calculation, I draw the underline and put the total in the right-hand column, 93,450. And since that's the first number in that column, I put the dollar sign there. Right? Now, I did the math in the left-hand column and put the summation in the right-hand column. And that's my total liability. I'm going to do the same thing down here with my common stock. I'm going to write 75,000 for my common stock, and my retained earnings is 106,700, which I got from my statement of retained earnings, right there. Okay. Remember, I needed my net income over here. Let me erase all of this out. I did the income statement first because I need the net income of 59,100 in order to be able to create my statement of retained earnings by plugging in that number here. And when I do, right, I'm able to create my ending retained earnings of this 106,700, which I now plug into my balance sheet right here. Okay, so you do the statements in that order. You don't start out with balance sheet. You can't do the balance sheet unless you have the retained earnings. You can't do the retained earnings unless you have your profit or loss. So this is 106,700, and that's a mathematical calculation. So I get an underline, and that summation is 181,700. And now this is the reason why I like to use two columns, is because I can now look down this column and see that I take my liabilities plus my equity. Right? That's a calculation, which will now give me my total, 275,150, my total liabilities plus stockholders' equity. Since that's the end of the calculation, I have a double underline and I put my dollar sign. So visually, when I'm looking at this financial statement, okay, it's easier for me to read this information and to know that here's my, assets equals liabilities plus equity. Well, I'm looking at my liabilities plus my equity gives me 275. Okay, by having everything in one column, like it's being shown in the solution, I actually have to really be looking at the numbers and paying attention to my underlines in order to be able to determine, what my figures are that I'm looking at. Okay, I mean, if you look at the total, if you're looking at the solution and you see the total stockholders' equity of 181,700, you have to really think about the 75,000 and the 106. And then on top of it, when you try to figure out, when you look at the 275,000 as the total liabilities and equity, now you really, really have to be thinking about, well, where's my you have to know that my liabilities and my stockholders' equity. So, I have 93,450, but is it 75, 106, or 181? Okay, so to me, it leads to a little bit more confusion. Whenever you have a mathematical calculation, go one column to the left and write your sum in the right-hand column, okay? And it makes it easier. Now, is it wrong, like the answer? No, the answer isn't wrong. It technically follows the generally accepted accounting principles. It follows GAAP, okay? But in doing it this way, it's easier to read the information when it's all typed out, okay? And as we get further and further into financial accounting, this again, we're looking at a 40,000 foot view, and this is going to become much more complicated. And by having the multiple columns, and multiple columns is called multi-step formatting. Okay, it's called multi-step formatting, and that's what most accountants use most of the time. Okay, when you only have one column, right, that's called single step. And the single step formatting is generally used when you have a small business and they don't have too many accounts, very few accounts, okay? And you might have just one mathematical calculation, like for example, they had just a few assets and they maybe just had one calculation for the liabilities, right? Because their equity is a capital account and that's all that, you would just have one account here. Well, you'd be able to see the math, accounts payable and a notes payable for a total liability, and then you'd see the equity here, and you have the underline underneath it to get your total liabilities and equity. It's easier to read if you only have that one mathematical calculation, and that's why they use the single step and for small businesses. But once you start getting into a little bit more complicated, where you have multiple calculations, you're always better off using the multi-step formatting, which is what I'm showing you in these videos. Okay. So I hope that little bit of practical experience, brought to the subject helps you. But if you decided to, just try to mimic what you're seeing, in your answers, the answer is right, and you're not going to have anything marked off wrong with it. But if you present your information like you see here in the video, that's also correct, and you're not going to have anything marked off wrong as far as formatting is concerned. Okay. So, as always, if you don't understand something, watch the video again. And if you still don't get it, feel free to contact an instructor. And so that's it for problem number 39 here. And we'll move on to number 40 in the next video. And I believe that one will probably just be one video because we just only need to create a balance sheet for that problem. So see you in the next video.